Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran and all-around evil terrorist scumbag whose tentacles reached around the world into the rear ends of puppet groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, and who recently slaughtered thousands of his own people for protesting his demonic regime, was killed in a series of missile strikes by the United States and Israel. Ironic, since he loved reciting the mantras death to America and death to Israel more than he loved reciting the Shahada. Khamenei's assassination has led to endless tantrums on social media, but even if you've been following the hysterics, you probably have no clue how devastating this is to Muslims, both to Sunnis and Shias. It's almost impossible to overstate how traumatic the assassination of Khamenei is to Muslims, but as usual, everyone is completely missing the big picture. So I'm going to break down a few important ideas in Islam and a little bit of forgotten history, and when we put it all together with what's going on in Iran, you'll understand why the avalanche of apostasy is about to accelerate until it absolutely buries Islam. First important idea: Muslims are superior to non-Muslims. In Surah 98, verse 6 of the Quran, Allah declares, "Verily, those who disbelieve in the religion of Islam, the Quran, and Prophet Muhammad, from among the people of the Scripture, Jews and Christians, and al-mushrikun," mushrikun are people who associate partners with Allah, "will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of creatures." Jews, Christians, and polytheists are the worst of creatures, according to the Quran. What about Muslims? In Surah 3, verse 110, Allah says to Muslims, "You are the best of peoples ever raised up for mankind." So, Muslims are the best of peoples, non-Muslims are the worst of creatures. Second important idea. It's built into Islamic thinking that when Muslims win a battle, it's because Allah is on their side. When they lose a battle, it's because Allah is punishing them for some sort of disobedience. The first major Muslim battle with the Meccans was the Battle of Badr. Muslims won, and Muhammad proclaimed, "You see, this is the proof that Islam is true." Surah 3, verses 12 to 13. "Say to those who disbelieve, you shall be vanquished and driven together to hell, and evil is the resting place. Indeed, there was a sign for you in the two hosts which met together in encounter, the Muslims and the polytheists, one party fighting in the way of Allah and the other unbelieving, whom they saw twice as many as themselves with the sight of the eye, and Allah strengthens with his aid whom he pleases. Most surely there is a lesson in this for those who have sight." Notice, the Muslim victory is a sign for the unbelievers. The next Muslim battle with the Meccans was the Battle of Uhud, which Muslims lost. And Muhammad proclaimed, "You see, this isn't because Islam isn't true, it's because Allah is punishing us for something we did." Surah 3, verse 152. "And Allah did indeed fulfill his promise to you when you were killing them," your enemy, "with his permission, until the moment you lost your courage and fell to disputing about the order and disobeyed after he showed you of the booty which you love. Among you are some that desire this world and some that desire the hereafter. Then he made you flee from them, your enemy, that he might test you. But surely he forgave you, and Allah is most gracious to the believers." So, Muslims were winning at first, but then they broke ranks and started grabbing the spoils, and Allah punished them by making them lose. When Allah is with you, you win. When you're disobedient, you lose. When Allah is on your side, he gives you the victory. When he's not on your side, you suffer defeat. As Islam spread west across northern Africa and into Europe and east all the way to India, its victories were proof that Allah was helping the Ummah conquer the world. Third important idea, the caliphate. A caliph is a successor to Muhammad. A caliphate is an Islamic state under the rule of a caliph. For nearly 13 centuries, Islam had a caliphate, an Islamic empire governed by some degree of Islamic law. Lots of times there were rival Muslim groups fighting for power, and not all Muslims in all areas were under the control of the caliph, but there tended to be one dominant Muslim empire being run by a successor to Muhammad. The first caliphate was the Rashidun Caliphate, which began shortly after Muhammad's death in 632 and lasted until 661. Then there was the Umayyad Caliphate from 661 to 750. This was succeeded by the Abbasid Caliphate from 750 until 1517. Lots of caveats with that one, though, because the Abbasid caliphs were sometimes mere figureheads for other Muslim rulers, and they didn't have much real power once the Mongols invaded. But after the Abbasids, we had the Ottoman Caliphate from 1517 to 1924. The Ottoman Caliphate collapsed in 1924. What happened there? Well, after decades of decline, the Muslims allied with the Germans, never a good idea in world wars, against Great Britain, Russia, France, the United States, and others. The Muslims were defeated. Great Britain and France sat down with a map of the Ottoman Empire and divided it up however they saw fit. Turkey secularized, and a couple of decades later, after World War II, Western nations decided that since the Germans were plotting with the Muslims to exterminate Jews in the British Mandate of Palestine, Jews had a pretty solid case for needing some small place where they wouldn't be at the mercy of jihadis. So, a tiny part of the Ottoman Empire was set aside for the Jews. The surrounding Muslim nations were enraged about Jews getting a strip of land that had previously been conquered by Muslims, so they attacked. And these surrounding Muslim nations, much like the Ottoman Empire, lost. This time, they were defeated by an army of Jews. Multiple Muslim nations were defeated by Jews. How did all of this affect Muslims psychologically? Let's just say they didn't take it too well. Think about those three ideas I mentioned earlier. Muslims are superior to non-Muslims, and yet Muslims in the 20th century were defeated over and over again by inferior non-Muslims. When Muslims win a battle, it's proof that God is on their side. And yet, in the 20th century, Christians, Jews, and other non-Muslims were winning the battles and the wars. For 13 centuries, Muslims had a caliphate, and yet, in the 20th century, they lost their caliphate, and there was nothing they could do about it. Caliphates had collapsed before, but prior to the 20th century, when a caliphate collapsed, it was immediately or eventually replaced by another caliphate. There was just a leadership change from one Muslim group to another Muslim group. But when the Ottoman Caliphate collapsed, it wasn't replaced by another caliphate. It was defeated and divided up by non-Muslims. There have been efforts to revive the caliphate, but you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Hence, in the minds of many people in the Muslim world, Islam lost. Islam was defeated. So, Muslim nations started modernizing and westernizing. Even in places like Afghanistan, women started dressing like European and American women, and going to college and pursuing careers in engineering and computer technology. Islam had lost, the West had won. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. Time to be more like the West and less like 7th century Arabia. But certain Islamic revivalist movements soon came up with an alternative explanation for why Muslims were losing. The alternative explanation was that non-Muslims weren't defeating Muslims because the Islamic ideas were false and outdated. No. Non-Muslims were defeating Muslims because Allah was punishing Muslims for disobedience and for not imposing Islamic law forcefully enough, and for having corrupt leaders, and for tolerating heresy. Allah was punishing the Ummah for disobedience. Now, if Muslims were losing because Allah was punishing them for disobedience, What was the solution? All Muslims had to do was become obedient and impose Islamic law and have devout leaders and crush heresy. And if they did, Allah would restore his favor and bless them to continue conquering the world and subjugating non-Muslims. In Sunni Islam, this view gave rise to the Muslim Brotherhood and similar movements, ultimately culminating in ISIS. And in Shia Islam, this view led to the Iranian Revolution. In Iran, Shia clerics seized control of the government so that they could run the nation according to Islamic law. They crushed disobedience. They beat people and imprisoned people and killed people, all to win back Allah's favor and restore his blessing. They've been doing that for almost 5 decades now. How are things looking for the hypothesis that Muslims are only losing because of disobedience and that by being more devout and forcefully imposing Islamic law, the tides would turn and Muslims would start winning again? How's it looking for that hypothesis? Not looking good. The United States and Israel just took out the leader of the entire Shia movement. Ayatollah Khamenei was Allah's agent for cracking down on disobedience and heresy. And look at what just happened to him. Shia clerics have been running Iran for nearly 5 decades, and they just keep getting weaker. Their obedience hasn't restored Allah's blessing. Their obedience hasn't helped them win at all. They're still losing, and it seems like they're on their way out. In other words, their hypothesis that Muslims were losing because of disobedience and that obedience would help them start winning again has been massively disconfirmed. Shias can still believe that Allah has some plan for the future, but the longer they lose, even when they think they're doing everything right, the more the avalanche of apostasy is going to accelerate. But that's Shias. What about Sunnis? Ayatollah Khamenei has been killing Sunni Muslims for decades. He's killed hundreds of thousands of Sunni Muslims through his puppet regimes. So Sunni Muslims could look at the assassination of Khamenei and think that Allah punished him by the hands of the United States and Israel for killing Sunnis. And there are Sunni Muslims who are celebrating the death of Khamenei, but for the most part, Sunnis are losing their minds online and throwing tantrums about the United States and Israel, and a surprising number of Sunnis are calling for unity with Shias, in spite of the fact that Sunnis and Shias have been killing each other since the 7th century. Why are so many Sunnis upset about the assassination of Khamenei? Well, think about it. Khamenei has been killing tons of Sunnis. There are around 1.7 billion Sunnis in the world, and they couldn't stop Khamenei because they're too weak. Who could stop Khamenei? The United States and Israel. From a Sunni perspective, who should crush the Shia regime? Sunnis. But they couldn't. Who's actually crushing the Shia regime? Non-Muslims, both outside and inside Iran. Keep in mind, even though there are Christians and atheists and Jews and Muslims and so on in the United States, Muslims tend to think of the United States as Christian. And even though there are Jews and Christians and Muslims and atheists and so on in Israel, Muslims tend to think of Israel as Jewish. In Iran, there are all kinds of groups as well. There are Zoroastrians and Christians and atheists and Muslims. Most people in Iran are sick of the Shia regime. So, who's wrecking the Shia regime right now from a Muslim perspective? Christians, Jews, and other non-Muslims. Definitely not Sunnis. Sunnis are too weak, as they have been for a long time. In other words, the assassination of Khamenei is a huge reminder to Sunnis that despite their numbers, they're still weak and getting weaker. The Muslim Brotherhood hypothesis that Muslims were only losing because of disobedience and that obedience would restore Allah's favor is, much like the Shia hypothesis, being massively disconfirmed. Muslims are throwing tantrums because they're looking around at the world and thinking, if Islam is true, this isn't the way things should be. and it's suffocating their confidence. And when Muslims are doubting, they tend to compensate by pretending to be more confident. This is why you're seeing so much chest thumping. But make no mistake, losing their caliphate, being weak and helpless before inferior creatures like Jews and Christians, and seeing their alternative explanation destroyed is causing lots of them to lose hope. It's eating away at them, and they're doubting their religion. Of course, just when you thought Muslims were out of alternative explanations, Western politicians have handed them a new alternative explanation. Muslims lost their caliphate. They've lost battle after battle, war after war, to inferior non-Muslims. Their original alternative explanation was that Allah was simply punishing them for disobedience. But obedience hasn't changed anything, so that explanation is failing. But now, thanks to Western leaders, lots of Muslims are thinking that Allah has other plans for helping them conquer the world. Allah is the best of planners, and his brilliant plan now is to use the fact that Islam creates nations that no one wants to live in. So the people in these nations try to get out of there as quickly as possible and move to Western nations. Allah will use this process to keep sending Muslims to Western nations until Islam takes over major cities at first and then takes over entire nations. Muslims can only believe that this is Allah's plan because Western leaders keep bringing in Muslims and helping them take over cities. So, oddly enough, it's non-Muslims who are keeping the hope alive. If Muslims didn't have this immigrate, populate, and subjugate strategy as their new alternative explanation, they would have nowhere else to turn. So, now you understand why the assassination of Khamenei by non-Muslim nations is so traumatic to Muslims. Their main explanation for decades for why Islam is so weak has been that they just needed to be more devout to win back Allah's favor. They tried that, and it was a complete, utter, total failure. No matter how Sharia compliant they are, they keep losing. Islam is only impressed by strength, but the Ummah just keeps getting weaker. Many Muslims will keep hoping that Allah has some other plan, but other Muslims will lose all confidence in the claims of Islam. Avalanche of apostasy accelerating in...
You tried on that. You tried on that. You tried on that. It just backfired on you. You tried on that. You tried on that. You tried on that. It just backfired on you. This is a part of our religion. There's a reason to it. Yeah?